Hey guys, tonight we descend into the cold, damp world of medieval Europe, but not the knight in shining armor fairy tale you might imagine. No jousts, no princesses, just stone walls, flickering torches, and the faint scratching sound of claws, echoing from beneath your feet. Picture this. You're creeping through a crumbling cellar, ankle-deep in straw and mystery meat, when you see it, just a flicker at first. A tail slinking into the shadows. The air smells of mold and last week's barley stew you swallow hard. Welcome to the medieval underworld of the rat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a steep stone stairwell, your breath turning white in the chill. The only light is a candle stub in your hand, and it's flickering nervously. The cellar you've entered belongs to a modest merchant's home. Barrels of grain stacked high, crates nailed shut, and the unmistakable signs of nibbling at every corner. You pause. Something is watching. Rats weren't just medieval pests. They were survivors. They nestled in bread ovens, tucked themselves into church pews, and thrived where humans barely scraped by. You step over a scattering of bones. Chicken? Maybe. Maybe not. The scratching sound returns, louder now. It's never just one rat. Ever. You crouch near a half barrel of oats, and there it is, a blur of fur and eyes that reflect your candlelight like tiny infernos. A black rat, ratus if you're feeling scholarly, zips into a wall crevice. And here's your charming twist. Those black rats probably weren't even native to Europe. They're stowaways from ancient ships, following trade winds from India and the Middle East, arriving with grain and silk and, well, more rats. By the 13th century, they were as common as fleas, and they brought plenty of those too. The medieval world wasn't ready. You wouldn't be either. You duck to avoid. A swinging cobweb and feel your ankle brush something soft. You freeze. Another rat, definitely alive. Definitely judging you. Historians still argue whether the true origin of Europe's black rat population was due to Roman expansion or later medieval trade spikes. But one thing's sure. Once rats found their way into cities, they never left. Their ability to climb, burrow, breed made them urban royalty. If walls could whisper, they'd likely complain about the nightly rat races. You hear it now, the sound of nesting. Not just one rat, but dozens. They've chewed through leather boots, slept atop wool sacks, and learned to avoid the humans who hunt them with broomsticks and bad aim. And here you are, in their favorite haunt. Don't worry, they usually only bite toes if you stop moving. The cellar gets colder as you move deeper, past a shattered amphora leaking old oil. Your candle starts to sputter. A rat skitters across your foot and disappears. You absolutely didn't scream. No one heard that. Probably. Every medieval town had these underground spaces. Storerooms, ice holes, forgotten cellars that doubled as rat penthouses. Some even tell stories of rats growing bold enough to climb into sleeping cradles or gnawing through coffins. Truth, legend, you'll never know. But it does explain the iron-bound chests and elaborate traps people started building. Then a quirky little detail. In some places, rats were believed to be demonic familiars, especially black ones. You think about that as a pair of glowing eyes. Stare at you from behind a wine barrel. Familiars or not, they're bold, they're quick, and they're hungry. You retreat, climbing back up the stairs, heart racing. As you push open the cellar door, your candle dies. Just a whisper of smoke. You're back in the main house now. Stone floor, rush-strewn hall, a roaring fireplace struggling against the winter air. The rats? Oh, they're still here. Beneath the floorboards, in the walls, behind the drapery. They're a part of this place more permanent than the family crest. You glance back at the cellar entrance door ajar. It creaks slightly in the draft. You could seal it, maybe shove something heavy in front of it. But rats don't care about doors. They chew through faith and timber alike. You sit on a low stool trying to calm your nerves. The merchant's home is silent now, except for the distant chirp of something very much not a bird. A rat, dragging. A dried fig across the floor, its claws ticking like a clock. And somehow that's worse, knowing they snack just like you. But here's the kicker. Despite their creepy reputation, rats weren't hated at first. They were tolerated, even appreciated sometimes. They cleaned up crumbs, devoured the remains of yesterday's stew, and served as a warning sign. If the rats fled town, so did the smarter townsfolk. Because rats know things. Your eyes are heavy now. The fire crackles softly. In the quiet, you can still hear movement. Little claws, little teeth, nests of soft fur hidden just out of sight. The medieval world is full of fearsome things. Swords, famines, inquisitions. But nothing quite as silently terrifying as a rat you can't see. And just when you're about to drift off, something lands lightly on the rafter above. You look up. A silhouette twitches its nose. It's watching, waiting, listening. And if rats could talk, you imagine it would say, "This is our world now. Sleep tight." You wake, or maybe you never truly slept, to the sensation of something small brushing against your foot. Just the blanket, you tell yourself. Just a dream. But outside the walls of this medieval home, the real nightmare is only beginning. The rat isn't just a furry kitchen thief anymore. It's now an invisible courier of death. You step outside onto the muddy street, your boots sinking slightly in slush and waste. The town is eerily quiet. A dog barks somewhere, but there are no children playing, no merchants hawking wares, just shuttered windows and the sour smell of illness hanging in the fog. This is where things change. The rats have evolved from nuisance to omen. You watch. One now, perched atop a heap of spoiled cabbage, licking its paws with an almost smug indifference. It doesn't know it carries a freight of disaster. Or maybe it does. Either way, its fleas do. The year is 1347, and you're in the port city or Messina, Sicily. The docks are crowded, not with traders, but with corpses. A dozen Genoese galleys drift in, their crews already stricken. They're barely able to tie off the ships before collapsing. You watch from the crowd as townspeople rush to help, unaware that the rats are scurrying ashore in droves. A rain of death on tiny, twitching feet. Mainstream historians agree. The Black Death began around this point, carried by fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, hitching rides on rats that stowed away on merchant ships. But here's where it gets controversial. Historians still argue whether rats were the main vector. Some claim human fleas and lice played a larger role. Others think it was a mix of both. Either way, you don't want to be within sneezing distance. If anyone right now, you trail a priest as he walks through town, muttering last rites over the dying. His robe sways with each step, the hem trailing in puddles. Rats follow, bold now, weaving between the fallen, gnawing at fingers. The priest doesn't notice, or he's stopped caring. You pass a cart loaded with bodies, a child's doll half smashed, beneath a wheel. They call it the Great Mortality. You don't know what it is yet, but you can feel it. The way people glance behind them, the way doors slam faster, the way even dogs seem unwilling to bark too loud. You duck into a bakery, hoping for shelter, only to find it abandoned. Dough sits half-kneaded on the table, hardened like a forgotten question. Rats perch on the counter, picking at a raisin loaf. They don't scatter when you enter. They simply watch you as if to say, "You're a guest in our kitchen now." And the worst part? They're everywhere. In the church, gnawing on candle wax. In the apothecary, squeezing behind jars of dried herbs. In the infirmary, burrowing beneath bandages and linens. They don't discriminate. They go where the warmth is, where the blood is. One quirky detail you'll like. People in some regions believed rats were attracted to sin, and that particularly. Sinful towns had the worst infestations. So now, along with prayer and leeches, people start confessing more often, as if repentance will stop the scratching under the floorboards. You walk to the edge of the city and see the pyres. Rows and rows of flames licking up toward the sky. carrying with them the last breath of thousands. But rats, clever little immortals, simply retreat from the fire and wait. When the air cools and the ashes settle, they return. Always. You wonder, do they know what they carry? The fleas, the bacteria, the doom. Or are they just living their little rat lives, totally unaware that every nip and scratch, every flea they shake off, is another link in a continent-wide chain reaction? You press your back to a stone wall, trying not to move. Across the alley, a man collapses, twitching. You hear someone shout that it's the plague from the east. They blame the ships, they blame the traders. A few even blame the sky. No one blames the rats. Historians still debate how fast the plague spread. Some accounts suggest it moved up to a mile a day in some regions. Others say it spread sporadically, flaring up in places months apart. You suspect the truth is as messy as the streets under your boots. Part ship, part traveler, part rat, all unstoppable. You think of the cellar again. The soft breathing in the dark. The tiny eyes that gleam like stars. That's where it started for you. But now, the rats aren't hiding. They own the alleys. They cross your path boldly, whiskers twitching. They're not afraid of you, they never were. A girl passes you on the road, her hands wrapped in linen, skin pale as milk. She doesn't look up. A rat peeks from her basket. You want to warn her? But the moment's gone. She disappears into the mist and you're left wondering if she'll live to see another sunrise. And this is only the beginning. Just a few ships, just a few rats. And then, Europe will burn. You wake to the tolling of a distant bell, slow, deliberate, and entirely too often. Once for the hour, twice for the dead, thrice for the warning. At this point, it might as well toll forever. You pull your hood tighter as you wander through narrow, cobbled lanes in Florence. The air feels thick, heavy with incense and dread. It's 1348 and everything smells like rotten rosemary. The rats by now are part of the landscape. They scurry beneath market stalls, nap inside empty armor in the blacksmith shop, and steal crumbs from beneath the pews of sanctuaries that have long since stopped offering sanctuary. You see one perched atop a merchant's scale, a living metaphor, balancing death on its back. Here in Florence, you witness something different. Not just the plague, but the way people respond to it. This is no longer just about survival. It's about reaction. Some logical, some ludicrous, all deeply human. The wealthy flee to their country estates, imagining that distance equals immunity. Peasants, of course, don't get that option. You pass a family dragging mattresses into a barn, hoping straw and chickens offer better odds than city walls. The irony? The rats are already there, nesting in the feed sacks. You duck into a chapel where a makeshift hospital now sprawls between the altar and confession booths. A nun, her face pale and streaked with soot, tends to a patient covered in black buboes. You stare too long. One of them bursts. The smell is unforgettable, like meat left out in the sun mixed with copper and fear. Somewhere behind you, a rat squeaks. Florence isn't alone in its agony. The plague spreads through trade routes like ink through parchment, reaching Paris, London, even remote mountain villages where no one's heard of ships or Genoese sailors. Historians still argue whether the disease traveled more by land or sea during this period, but the result is the same. No one is safe and rats seem to know no borders. A quirky footnote lost in most history books. Some towns believed cats and dogs were spreading the disease, not the rats. So what did they do? Mass slaughtered them. You can guess the result. Rat populations soared. Oops. You head into the market square, though there's little left to buy. Bread costs 3 times what it did last month. You see someone trading a ring for onions. Someone else offers their boots for a jar of honey. Gold means nothing if your children are dead. A rat climbs onto a sack of grain, chews through the palm corner, and watches you as the kernels spill like sand through an hourglass. And what of the doctors? Ah, yes, the infamous plague doctors with their beaked masks and leather cloaks. You finally see one now, waddling down the street like a bird escaped from a nightmare. The mask is stuffed with herbs, rosemary, thyme, dried flowers, all meant to filter the air and ward off evil humors. It doesn't help. You know it. He probably knows it too. He pauses beside a body. The man's lips are blue, his limbs stiff. The doctor kneels, murmurs something about bad air, and drizzles vinegar on the corpse. The rat watching from the alley seems unimpressed. You slip away into a tavern, half hoping for warmth, half hoping for wine. Inside, 3 men argue theology. One insists the plague is divine punishment. Another blames witches. The third says, "It's the stars." You sip from a dirty mug and wonder if it really matters. The rats are beneath the table, picking at crumbs, unfazed by your existential crisis. There's a growing sentiment in the city. Dance macabre. You see it in paintings, poems, even public theater. Skeletons dancing hand in hand with kings and paupers alike. Death is the great equalizer now. No one escapes, not nobles, not priests, not even children. You step into a side street and find a mural freshly painted. A skeletal figure leading a parade of rats through a burning village. Not exactly subtle. Here's something oddly fascinating. People start sleeping in graveyards. Yes, really. Not out of desperation, but out of faith. They believe proximity to the dead might appease the spirits and spare them. So now even the final resting places aren't peaceful. You walk past rows of tombstones and see flickers of candlelight, the huddled forms of the living curled like commas beside the dead. And all the while, the rats move silently through this nightmare ballet, darting between limbs, behind coffins, over cold, crumbling stone. You get the feeling they don't see the difference between a house and a tomb anymore. The city changes as the death toll rises. Doors are painted with red crosses. Entire households vanish overnight. Street performers now play requiems instead of bawdy tunes. Children's laughter is replaced by coughing, and somewhere, someone is always digging. The ground never rests. You overhear rumors, always whispered, always grim. The north is worse. Venice has sealed its gates. England has gone mad. You imagine rats on Viking ships, rats in castles, rats in monasteries. They fit anywhere. They belong nowhere, like tiny ghosts with tails. A scholar once told you that Rattus rattus, the black rat, prefers warmth and proximity to humans. It doesn't survive well alone. Isn't that something? The very thing that needs us most may be the thing that kills us quickest. Historians now think that as cities grew denser, rats thrived. You built homes. They built empires beneath them. As the day ends, you climb a hill overlooking Florence. Smoke rises in lazy spirals. The sunset paints the buildings gold, but it's a sickly gold, like bruised fruit. You see a rat pause on the ridge beside you, silhouetted against the fading light. It stands on its hind legs, sniffs the wind, and scurries away. You're alone again. Just you, the plague, and the shadows that move when you're not looking. The cart creaks before you hear it. That groan of wood and rusted iron wheels grinding across uneven stone. You know what's coming. You've seen it enough. Bring out your dead, the voice calls. Not loudly, not urgently. Just tired. You glance down a crooked alleyway and watch a boy haul a bundled figure over his shoulder. Too small to carry such weight, he drags more than lifts. The cart doesn't stop, it never really stops. And just as you brace yourself to look away, a rat leaps off the bundle, scampers across the boy's foot, and vanishes into the gutter. It's not the death that shocks you anymore. It's how quickly the rats move in. You've begun to think they can smell grief, not blood or sickness, grief. And that, my friend, lingers like damp laundry in a sealed room. You move through London. Now different city, same symphony, coughs, sobs, church bells, rats. The Thames reeks, but that's nothing new. What is new are the plague pits. Huge open graves where entire families are lowered in together. The dead are no longer washed or blessed. Sometimes they aren't even named. A fringe tale you overhear while loitering near a baker's door. One grave digger swears the rats are organizing. Yes, organizing. Claims he saw them in neat rows along a ridge like tiny soldiers, watching the burial. Some even stood on 2 legs. They weren't eating, he whispered, just watching. Okay, sure, Herbert, maybe take a nap. Still, it's hard not to watch the rats differently after that. You pass a man preaching beside a broken fountain. He's dressed in sackcloth, barefoot, smearing ash across his face with unsettling devotion. "Repent," he shouts. "The rat is God's whisper. The plague is your answer." You glance at the people watching him, some nodding, others weeping, one carving something into the fountain's base. A rat-shaped symbol. Lovely. It's here, in this rising chaos, that flagellants arrive. They flood the streets like religious, parades gone sideways, bare-chested, bleeding, chanting hymns through clenched teeth. They believe that by whipping themselves they can atone for the sins that caused the plague. You watch a line of them walk barefoot through rat-infested streets, blood dripping on cobbles. The rats follow naturally. Some even keep pace, trotting alongside as if attending some grim festival. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movement spread the plague further or merely added an unsettling soundtrack to its devastation. Probably both. But it's undeniable. They captured the public's attention. Who needs a priest when you can get salvation and spectacle all in one? A woman beside you sighs. "They said it was the Jews," she murmurs. "They're poisoning." "Wells?" You stiffen. There it is, the panic pivot. When understanding fails, blame finds a target. This lie spreads as fast as the disease. Soon entire Jewish communities are massacred. Strasbourg, Mainz, Cologne. It's not medicine or science, it's fear wearing armor. The rats, of course, are not picky. They feed on any body, any race, any creed. You've seen them strip a corpse to the ribs in under an hour. They don't ask about your beliefs. They only ask if you've stopped moving. In a quiet moment, you slip into a scribe's room. A candle flickers beside a quill soaked in drying ink. Pages are scattered across the table, records mostly. Lists of names, dates of death, margins full of notes. One reads, "Too many to count. Rats ate the ledger." You laugh. It feels good to laugh. It also feels like the candle just went out on its own. You move on, shoulders brushing against hanging herbs in doorways, lavender, mint, garlic. They don't smell nice anymore. They smell desperate. A doctor passes by, maskless, muttering about miasmas and planetary alignment. His theory? The alignment of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in March 1345 corrupted the air. Historians still argue whether these astrological theories delayed real progress or merely reflected the limits of their era's science. Either way, the rats don't care about Saturn. You duck into a barn outside the city. Inside, a family huddles together, faces pale and wide-eyed. They've nailed the doors shut from the inside. A fire smolders low in the hearth. On the wall, charcoal scrawls read, "We have no rats. We burn our dead." But a small scratching from the loft tells you otherwise. You climb the ladder and find a rat staring at you beside a gnawed sack of barley. One eye is missing. It doesn't blink. Neither do you. You leave quickly. And as the disease continues its relentless sweep, you begin to notice the rats aren't even afraid anymore. They don't run when you stomp. They don't scatter when you throw rocks. Some just sit there, calm, curious, confident. You see one eating a chicken wing next to a dead man's boot. It looks up mid-bite, almost smug. There's an eerie moment in an abandoned schoolhouse. You step over toppled benches and dropped quills. A chalkboard reads, "Lesson 14, the Roman Republic." A single rat is curled on the teacher's chair. Asleep, maybe. You don't wake it. Down the lane, you spot something new. A puppet show. In the middle of the street, two children have built a makeshift stage using crates and old cloth. They're marionettes? Rats dressed in scraps of velvet and lace dancing across a miniature village. One rat puppet is lowered onto the others with a red paint smudge on its belly. The crowd applauds. You stare, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You retreat to the edge of the city where the countryside begins to reclaim land. Crops wither from lack of tending. Animals roam unmilked. Churches fall quiet, but still, rats. A barn door hangs open and inside, a nest. Dozens of pink, blind pups squirming in a bed of hair, fabric, and what looks suspiciously like a rosary. You shiver. Not from cold, but because you realize something. This isn't just a story of disease, it's the rat story too. They were always here. We just started noticing too late. You lie down in a field, the stars flickering like forgotten promises. You hear the wind, you hear the rustle of wheat, and you hear the soft, almost rhythmic squeak of paws in the dark. You wake up before dawn, or maybe you never slept at all. Hard to tell when the sky's the same shade of murky gray as your thoughts. The dew clings to your sleeves, cold and sticky, and when you sit up in the field, a rat darts from under your cloak. Bold little thing. Not even startled. Just irritated that you rolled over its warm patch. You dust yourself off and begin walking again, tracing the fading scent of wood smoke toward a distant hamlet. As you pass a sagging signpost, illegible now except for a carved rat shape someone's scratched in, it hits you. This is all beginning to feel normal. The carts, the coughing, the sermons, the gnawing. Not just terrifying anymore. Routine. And that's maybe the scariest part. In this village nestled among dying hedges and crooked thatch, you hear the clang of iron. Blacksmith still at it, bless him. You peek inside the forge. No horse in sight. But he's hammering out a curious object, something like a trap, but oddly intricate. Bigger ones, he mutters without looking up. Not just the wee ones now. Big as cats, eyes like fire. You glance down. At his feet lies a pile of mangled rat carcasses, twisted metal embedded in their spines. Some fight back, he adds, as if that explains everything. You move on. You've heard tales. Whispers passed between exhausted peasants and disillusioned. Monks, stories of enormous rats. Dire rats, they call them. Lurking in the ruins of abandoned abbeys. One friar insisted he saw a creature the size of a sheep dragging a priest's robes into the crypt beneath Canterbury. Intelligent, he said. It looked at me. Of course, he was half-starved and feverish, so grain of salt. Or rat droppings, whichever's handier. Still, as you edge deeper into the countryside, it's hard not to feel watched. You stop at a burned-out chapel. Only the stone arch remains, blackened and hollow, but someone's hung a wooden charm over it, crudely carved rat skulls strung together like garlic. Inside, moss creeps over collapsed pews, and in the altar's shadow, bones, human, child-sized. But it's not the bones that make you step back, it's the dozen rats sitting silently in a circle around them. You swear one turns its head as you retreat. There's a shifting of power in the air now. People are no longer simply dying, they're unraveling. Cities once filled with proud trade guilds and sacred oaths now lie fractured into suspicion and fevered myth. A woman approaches you on the road, breathless. She presses something into your palm. A smooth black stone etched with tiny scratch marks. Protection, she whispers, and scurries away before you can protest. The marks resemble claw prints, or a language. One that probably says, "This doesn't work, but good luck." You tuck it into your pocket anyway. In a small market town that somehow still has stalls open, you see a new trade emerging. Rat catchers. Gaunt, wiry figures, half hunters, half performers. They parade cages filled with snapping, chittering captives like trophies. Children point and cheer. You overhear one boast, "This one's got 3 tails and tastes of copper." Witch rat. Delicious, but not everyone's buying. A merchant at the end of the row sells cheese riddled with holes in what he calls rat wine, which he swears wards off plague if you sip it during a full moon. He gives you a sample. It tastes like mildew and regret. You decline the bottle. Historians still argue whether medieval pest control did more harm than good. After all, when cats were blamed and killed en masse, rats thrived. In some towns, cat populations plummeted, and the Black Death followed shortly after. So yes, they meant well. But maybe don't throw out your feline friends just yet. You pass a schoolhouse repurposed into a rat morgue. Children no longer learn. Latin declensions here, instead they stack rodent corpses in neat pyramids. The local priest blesses the pile daily. You ask why, and he shrugs. Rats have souls too. Then mutters, or maybe we're just covering our bases. You try not to linger on what covering our bases means when rats outnumber people. 10 to 1, along a riverbank you find a hermit. tall, filthy, and festooned with rat tails braided into his beard. He beckons you with a finger and intones, "I have seen the Rat King." You nod politely, thinking this is your cue to run. But no, he insists. Knotted by tail and bound by plague, they move as one, sing as one. The old gods returned, in fur and tooth. You don't see any singing, just a lot of rats near his stew pot. But the tale stays with you, especially that phrase, bound by tail. Later, in an abandoned mill, you actually see one, or what might be one. A cluster of rats knotted together, tails twisted in blood and straw trying to scurry in. 12 directions at once. It's disgusting, it's mesmerizing. You back away slowly, heart thumping, and then you hear a new sound. Music. Soft, lilting pipe music coming from the forest edge. Children follow it, adults too. You edge closer, half expecting a Pied Piper. But there's no one. Just a circle of rats perched on stones listening, like a woodland recital. When the wind dies down, so does the song. And so do the rats. They disperse. No rush. Just done. At this point, you start to wonder. Maybe the rats aren't following the plague. Maybe it's following them. In one village, a farmer tells you his fields died overnight. Not the crops, the soil itself. "It twitches," he says, dead serious. You check it out. He's not wrong. The earth pulses faintly, like breath. Rat tunnels beneath. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The land is hollowing, and when the wind shifts, you smell it. That warm, musky, decaying scent of rat dens, multiplied 1,000-fold. Not just in the fields now. Under homes. Churches, bathhouses. You're not walking over land anymore. You're walking on ceilings, rat ceilings. Someone near you whispers a new rhyme. You haven't heard this one before. Black tail, long tooth, hide your bread and hold. Your youth. Squeak and scratch night and day, pray the rat will go away. Comforting. You glance up, and for the first time you notice something. On the roofs, in the trees, perched on ledges, watching. They've always been underfoot. Now they're above you, too. You slip into a clearing at dusk. The sky painted bruised purple, and feel the hush before frenzy. Torches flare along a makeshift wooden scaffold in the village square. You steady your breath, inhaling smoke, splintered pine scent, and that ever-present whisper of something scuttling just beyond sight. Tonight's event is not for the faint of heart. You find yourself wedged between villagers, some clutching rosaries, others gripping knives as if to protect themselves from invisible evil. In the center stands a frail woman, bound at the wrists, her hair wild, her eyes wide with terror and something else, confusion. The presiding witch-finder, a hulking man wearing patched leather, strides forward. He raises a flaming brand, declares her guilty of summoning demons, that she consorted with shadows and lured rats to spread pestilence. Irony drips like blood from the torchlight. But who here notices irony? Your foot nudges something soft. A rat, a scrawny gray creature, paces at your heel, whiskers twitching. It looks up at you, unimpressed, as though it's seen this show countless times. It's the real star of the night, but no one will burn it. Too small, too sneaky, too helpful in clearing crumbs from underfoot. And if you kill it, 10 more will fill its place. The witchfinder shouts, "Does she not confess?" The woman's voice cracks. "I swear I did no harm." A cough rattles from the crowd. Someone spits. The flames roar beneath the crisping pyre. Villagers want blood. They want justice. They want fear to die in fire. In medieval Europe, scapegoating was a favorite pastime. Blame a witch and suddenly your fields will grow again. Your child will stop coughing, your rats will leave. Historians still argue whether witch trials were driven more by misogyny, religious fervor, or simple mass hysteria. The truth is tangled like a rat's nest. The witchfinder lights the kindling. Sparks fly upward, like fireflies fleeing doom. People gasp. The woman's eyes flick to the dark tree line. You follow her gaze. Dozens of rats emerge, tails high, creeping through the long grass as if drawn by the scent of terrified blood. They stop just before the pyre, forming a semicircle. It's almost respectful. A ceremony. A fringe tale tells that in some villages people believed witches transformed into rats at night to escape persecution, a shape-shifting sorcery that sent poor beasts running for their rodent lives. Of course, skeptics, scholarly types, still argue whether anyone really believed that, or if it was a cautionary legend told to keep children from the fields after dark. Yet here you are, watching both witch and rat condemned by fear. The pyre roars. Heat lashes your face. The woman trembles, tears glimmering in the firelight. You glance down. A rat nibbles on a dropped piece of bread by your boot. Thy neighbor screams a prayer, and your rat friend scampers off, vanishing into shadow. Then the unimaginable happens. A second rat appears on the scaffold itself, near the woman's ankle. It sniffs at her rope knot, then looks up at her pleading face. For a heartbeat, woman and rat share a moment of recognition. Two innocents, victims of hysteria. And in that moment, you swear the rat's nose wrinkles in sympathy. The fire consumes. The pyre's lower logs. Smoke billows, you taste ash. A child wails, the woman shrieks. In the flicker, rats disappear into every nook, under benches, into straw, along rafters. They leave no trail, like thieves in reverse. The witch is gone. Ashes. Dancing on the wind. The flames die to embers, the crowd disperses, relieved. Justice has been served. Evil is burned out. Except for the rats. You step onto the charred platform and see claw marks in the wood. Tiny footprints. They lead away, deeper into darkness. You pause to consider. Women were burned in dozens of towns during plague years, sometimes accused of summoning rats to spread sickness. Meanwhile, real rats persisted, entirely blameless in the courts of men. They didn't pay tithes. They didn't kneel for mass. Yet they survived every purge. You walk past abandoned torches, and the rat at your heel returns. It comes closer, sniffs the air near your boots, and glances toward the remains of the pyre. It's as if it's cataloging the night's atrocities. You pat its coarse fur. It allows it. Rats love heat, after all. Some more fringe rumors. Certain enclaves believed making a rat drink holy water would reveal witchcraft. That if the rat recoiled, divine proof was at hand. Practical? Obviously not. But desperate people will try anything. Historians still argue whether any priest actually tried it, or if it's just a grotesque joke that survived in marginal notes. You squat to face the rat eye to eye. Its whiskers. Brush yours. In that silence, you wonder how many real witches, if any, kissed rats for warmth, sought their company for comfort, only to be lynched for it. You wonder how many rats unwittingly carried them home, shared their hearths, then betrayed them with a bite or a scratch. The night air is thick and alive. You smell damp earth, cooking flesh, and rat musk. It's oddly comforting in a sick way, proof of life. The rat scampers off, leaving you alone with ash and memory. As you rise, torchlight flickers on the nearby church. A priest stands at the door, blessing passers-by with holy water and muttering prayers for protection. He sees you. Raising his hand, he blesses you too. You nod politely, but all you can think about is the tiny marks on the scaffold and how justice and rats slip through human fingers. You walk away, but the echoes remain. The crackle of burning wood, the woman's last cry, and the soft patter of rat feet. You won't forget. None of it. Because real terror isn't the flames. It's what we fail to see at our feet. A breeze stirs the embers and sends sparks toward the sky. For a moment, they look like hundreds of red eyes. Then they vanish. The rats will return by dawn, whether witches are blamed or not. You close your eyes, inhale the night one last time, and move on. The ratting chorus guiding you into the shadows. You rub your eyes, groggy now, stepping into another town square that smells more like damp parchment and sour ale than fear. This one's got cobblestones slick with moss and a thick fog that clings to your ankles like guilty secrets. There's no execution platform tonight. No howling mob. Just silence. And a rickety wagon at the center, its sides painted with symbols, saints, and rats. Dozens of them. This is the plague doctor's stage. He's already here, of course. Tall hat, beaked mask, gloved fingers glistening with oil of roses. He looks like a cartoon villain from a kid's fever dream. You can't see his eyes behind the tinted lenses, but he sees you. Nods. Welcomes you silently. No words tonight. He doesn't speak anymore, they say. Something about inhaling too many miasmas. Or maybe he just saw too much. He points to a chart. A large vellum sheet tacked to a post. You walk closer. It's a rat pathography. A ridiculous attempt to track where rats had been like they followed road signs or honored borders. You chuckle, but the townsfolk take it seriously. They believe if they just map enough bites, they'll understand the curse. One figure stands out. Patient Zero. A boy named Matthias. Blonde curls, blue eyes, dead within a week. Bitten by a rat on a dare. Or so the legend says. But historians still argue whether this Matthias ever existed, or if he was invented to give people a name to curse when the real enemy was too small to see. The plague doctor gestures again. You follow. He leads you into a makeshift infirmary, really just an abandoned barn now full of straw mattresses and hollow-eyed villagers. The air reeks of vinegar, dried herbs, and something underneath. Sweet rotting. A woman moans gently as you pass. Her arms blackened, swollen to twice its size. No one touches her, except the rats. You see one on the rafters, watching. Here's a detail you didn't expect. Medieval plague kits included flowers, perfumes, even cut onions, placed near the sick to absorb the illness. As if rats cared about bouquet arrangements. Still, you admire the effort. One desperate nurse waves a satchel of dried lavender in your face. You sneeze. She beams with hope. You make your way to the far corner, where the plague doctor's apothecary. Setup looks like something from a sorcerer's pantry. Tiny bottles of mercury, arsenic, crushed emerald. Yes, emerald, and even powdered toad. Fringe medicine at its finest. One jar holds a dead rat floating in alcohol. Preserved. For study, allegedly. Or protection. The doctor motions toward reverently. You stare at the rat's curled paws, its bloated belly. The label reads Specimen Number 6, Pestis Confessor. Apparently, some believed a single preserved rat could absorb disease energy, like a sin-eater of the rodent world. Historians still argue if this was medicine or mysticism, or both, because honestly, medieval people didn't like drawing that line too clearly. Suddenly, a cough breaks out behind you, wet, violent, echoing through the rafters. A child this time. Her mother clasps her tightly, rocking, whispering something about Saint Apollonia. You feel the urge to help, but don't know where to start. The doctor? He stirs something green and bubbling in a flask, shrugs. He's lost more than he's saved. Rats move freely here. One dashes across the floor like it owns the place. Another hangs upside down from the rafters like a furry bat. Nobody reacts. You get the sense they're considered part of the architecture now, like bad dreams made flesh. The doctor points to a side table where books lie open, parchment curling at the edges. Some of the pages are covered in tiny rat prints, ink smudged, where paws danced across them. One margin reads, Avoid the east wind. Another, Boil a rat's tail with rose water. Still another, Do not look them in the eyes too long. You tilt your head, seriously. Apparently, in some fringe belief circles, looking into a rat's eyes during plague season invited spiritual transference. You'd absorb their wandering spirit, become rat-touched, and start dreaming in tunnels. Ludicrous, yes, but in times of death, people invent their own science and their own monsters. The doctor nods toward the window. Through the cracks in the barn slats, you see townspeople building a crude barricade from wagons and hay bales, blocking roads. Rats come. From the next village, they say, never theirs. Always someone else's, you sigh. The idea of rats respecting geography is laughable, but again, it comforts them. You hear music, faint and sourceless. A lute, maybe, or a broken flute. The doctor turns to a drawer and removes a vial. He uncorks it and sniffs. His shoulders. He's not hopeful. You take a seat beside one of the dying. A young man with a rosary clenched so tightly the beads cut into his palms. You ask if he's scared. He whispers, "No, I've made peace, but I hope the rats don't come tonight." I hate the way they watch. You can't blame him. You look up at the rafters again. More of them now, just watching. Quiet. Present. Always. Later, you exit into the fog, the doctor watching you go with an unreadable gaze. He lifts one gloved hand in a small wave. You nod back. You pass the rat cart again, the symbols on its side now looking less ridiculous, more like warning signs. A small plaque at the base reads, "To know them is to fear less." Or maybe it's the other way around. Behind you, the moaning continues, and somewhere in the dark, a rat squeals, sharp and sudden, then silence. You head back toward the shadows, crunching gravel underfoot, the air thick with stories you don't want to believe but somehow do, because fear is sticky, and so are rat prints. The fog thickens as you wander onward, settling low like spilled milk across a scarred village road. You try not to breathe through your nose. There's a familiar tang in the air, part smoke, part decay, and part something you don't want to identify too closely. A bell rings in the distance, slow, deliberate. Not for celebration, this bell's for death. You follow the sound. Your boots crunch over bones of old straw and brittle leaves, but beneath it, you swear you hear a different sound. A skitter, a scuffle. The soft percussion of tiny claws over wood and stone. You've come to a monastery, not one of those towering Gothic behemoths, but a quiet, secluded place. Walls of worn sandstone, a tiled roof patched with moss, and narrow arched windows that seem built to keep. Secrets more than let in light. The bell hangs in a crooked tower, still swaying. Monks once thrived here, you learn. A holy brotherhood devoted to study, prayer, and herbal medicine. But now it's quiet, eerily so. You push the old wooden gate open. It doesn't creak. It sighs. And that's somehow worse. Inside, the courtyard's overrun. Weeds coil between paving stones like veins, and half the herb garden is choked with nettles. But some plants persist. Valerian, wormwood, lavender. You recognize them from the plague doctor's kit. They're not growing by accident. As you step into the cloistered hall, the temperature drops. Not in degrees, but in spirit. Cold, like a room that knows too much. The walls are covered with fading frescoes, scenes of Saint Sebastian riddled with arrows, of Archangel Michael trampling devils. And in one corner, oddly enough, a man holding a rat by the tail while surrounded by weeping angels. That one wasn't in the Bible, you're pretty sure. A monk approaches. He's thin as a whisper, with robes that hang off him like wet laundry. His face is all bone and shadow, but his voice is gentle. He asks what you seek. You mutter something vague about rats, illness, survival. He nods, unsurprised. Says they've had many pilgrims lately. He leads you through a narrow corridor into a dim room filled with books, real ones. Not charms or ledgers, but illuminated manuscripts stacked high, each covered in symbols, marginalia, and very fine dust. He shows you one that creaks as it opens, De Animalibus Purgatorius. On the purging beasts, it's an unofficial bestiary of medieval scapegoats. You run your fingers over sketches of cats, owls, toads, and rats. The rat entry is the longest. In shaky Latin, it describes the shadow mover, the grain thief, the pale-furred omen of pestilence. Some pages accuse the rat of consorting with demons. Others claim it was a test sent by God. Historians still argue whether such bestiaries were meant to be taken literally or metaphorically, but clearly, some monks hedged their bets. He tells you of Brother Anselm, once the monastery's scribe, who became obsessed with the idea that rats were divine punishers sent to measure human sin. He even counted them, carefully documenting rat appearances, movements, and bite patterns, comparing them with the local moral failures. Gossip, theft, gluttony, and yes, lust. Always that one. You're shown his logbook. It's equal parts chilling and absurd. On one page, he describes a rat that followed a dishonest baker for 3 days. On another, he marks the rat visitation rate for a week when someone stole 2 communion wafers. The connection is tenuous at best, But the dedication, impressive. The monk smiles faintly. Says Anselm eventually locked himself in the bell tower with a loaf of barley bread and waited for judgment. When they found him weeks later, he was dead. The bread untouched, rats everywhere. You try not to shiver. Another room. This one darker, stiller. A collection of rat relics, the monk explains. Odd charms believed to protect against infestation. A rosary made from rat bones. Okay, a little creepy. A silver ring shaped like a coiled rat tail. A relic box marked Crinus Muris Sanctus, the holy whisker of the rat saint. You blink. Excuse me? Apparently, a local legend claimed that one rat, white as snow, led a group of children away from a burning village and into safety. Some called it a miracle. Others thought it was Pied Piper Part 2. Either way, a small cult formed, praying to this semi-mythical rat for protection. The church officially denounced it, but not before several towns built small altars in their cellars, just in case. Quirky? Absolutely. But fringe faith often grows where logic withers. You leave the relic room, your skin prickling. The monk offers you a warm drink, clove wine spiced with something unfamiliar, and walks you to the scriptorium. It's abandoned now, but you see scrolls left half-copied, ink pots tipped over as if the scribes left mid-sentence. Maybe they did. Maybe they heard squeaking. You lean over one unfinished page. It's a prayer, or perhaps a curse. The words are smudged, the Latin tense confused. One phrase sticks out, though, repeated in the margins. Ut vermis oret pro nobis. Let the worm or rat pray for us, you look up. The monk shrugs, says it's metaphor probably, but he doesn't sound convinced. You step outside again, the monastery now behind you. The bell has stopped. The sky above has darkened to a bruise, and the fog has grown quiet. That kind of silence you only get when something is watching you, and choosing for now to stay still. You feel a tug at your ankle. Not painful, just a brush. You look down, just a rat. Fat and brown and uninterested in your soul. Still, you walk faster. The rat disappears behind a pile of stones and you try not to take it personally. After all, this isn't a haunted house. This is Europe in the throes of plague, paranoia, and poorly funded public health. So you walk on, your breath fogging, slightly in the cold, damp air, and follow a narrow road that winds its way into a small town nestled like a stubborn mole in the folds of a muddy hillside. This one, you've heard, has survived the worst of the plague, or so the rumors say. But the people here aren't thriving. They're hiding. Shuttered windows, bolted doors, and the faintest hint of movement behind curtains that twitch like nervous eyelids. You knock once, just out of curiosity, but no one answers. You're not surprised. People have grown wary. Wary of strangers, wary of rats, wary of the sky itself. A half-collapsed sign swings overhead. Apothecary, charms, tonics, and leech rental. You're pretty sure the last part's a joke. Mostly. You step inside. The air smells sharp. Resin, vinegar, dried. Herbs and a whiff of something animal. The shelves sag with small vials, twisty roots, and bundles of what you sincerely hope are lavender. The apothecary herself is a woman well into her 60s, her hands stained with ink and soot. She greets you like she's expecting a duel, then softens when you ask about rats. Ah, she says and taps her temple. The clever little monsters. She walks you through her personal war with them. It started small, scratching in the pantry, then teeth marks on her cheese, then entire jars of powdered rosemary gone missing. They're thieves, she mutters, but also teachers. You tilt your head, intrigued. She explains how, after the plague wave hit, she started tracking their behavior. Not just out of annoyance, but because she suspected the rats knew more than people did. Where the air turned bad, where the food soured, where the people were about to die, the rats always arrived first. Historians still argue whether rats followed the sickness or foretold it. But to the apothecary, there's no question. She shows you her rat map. A large parchment with pins, charcoal smudges, and oddly poetic. Notations like rat chorus by the well, and three whiskers marred warning. You stifle a chuckle. She doesn't. In every town, she says, the rats arrive 2 days before the bodies. You follow her to the back room where she stores her more experimental research. There's a cage, empty now, that once held a rat she'd named Crispin. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant specimen, learned to push a bell for a treat, avoid vinegar-soaked cloths, and even, allegedly, select the vial marked wormwood. When prompted with a copper coin, you raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Cleverness runs where fear doesn't. There's also a drawer labeled rat-based cures, and you hesitate before opening it. Inside, dried tails ground to powder, tiny black rat hearts in glass vials, and something labeled anti-plague paste number 7 that looks suspiciously like it's made from rat droppings and marigold petals. You ask if anyone's actually used. As she grins. Twice, one recovered, one grew extra teeth, not in the usual places. You close the drawer. But here's where it gets weirder. The apothecary shows you a letter, yellowed and fraying at the edges. It was sent to her father, also an herbalist, from a traveling healer in Provence. The letter outlines a strange belief that some rats, particularly those with white fur and red eyes, were not plague carriers at all, but immune, even protective. A blessed strain, the letter says, that locals fed and housed like tiny household gods. These rats supposedly kept homes plague-free, or perhaps they just bit less. Some families even marked their doorways with chalk rat symbols, hoping to attract the lucky kind. Historians debate the truth of this red-eyed protector rat legend, but you can still find stone etchings of rats in older French villages, often next to hearths or over basements. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe rats were worshipped as much as they were reviled. The apothecary, for her part, keeps a small carved rat totem near her window. It's made of bone and has eyes inlaid with garnet. She insists it keeps the real rats away. You're not sure if she believes it or just likes the aesthetics. Either way, you start noticing more of them around town. Little rat charms carved into shutters, tucked beneath floorboards, dangling from children's belts like lucky teeth. You leave the shop a bit dizzy from the smells and stories. Outside, the rain begins again. Light but insistent, you pull your cloak tighter. A boy across the square watches you with intense curiosity, then scurries off into an alley the moment you return the glance. You don't chase him, but the way he moved, low and quick, reminds you of something smaller. As you continue through the village, you notice a man setting out bowls by the edge of his property. Not for dogs or cats, he's scattering grain. For the watchers, he says, not looking at you. If they eat here, they don't come in. You ask who the watchers are. He smiles, but it's not warm. You know, and that's when it really clicks. In some towns, the rats weren't just vermin. They were seen as omens, as familiars, as messengers between the healthy and the dead. People left food out for them, not just to appease, but to negotiate. Take the grain, they might whisper. Not the children. Strange. Sure. But when the world falls apart, superstition is just another word for strategy. One last house catches your attention. Its threshold is lined with tiny bones. At first you assume it's a warning, but no, they're laid gently in patterns like an offering. The homeowner, a blind woman with a crow on her shoulder, says they're from her protectors. They've been kind to me, she says. I don't ask why. You don't either, because maybe, just maybe, they remember who feeds them. You move farther from that village, tracing the edge of a field where the wheat grows in uneven patches, almost as though the land itself is nervous. It's quieter here, less human sound, more natural murmurs. Wind against bark. A raven's croak. Something slithering unseen in the grass. You try not to overthink that last part. In the distance, there's a monastery. Sturdy stone, roof patched with moss, a single bell frozen mid-hang in its open tower. You make your way there, curious. Monasteries in the plague years were like islands, sometimes safe, sometimes cursed, and always full of monks who'd seen too much and slept too little. The wooden door creaks open before you even knock. The man who greets you looks young, but tired. He motions you in with one hand and wipes his nose with the other, casually, but still enough to make you question your proximity. Inside, the walls are painted with scenes of judgment, angels, demons, and, oddly, rats. Not cartoonish rats, but solemn ones. One mural shows them circling a throne. Another has them crawling from a burning book. Symbolic, the monk says, noticing your stare. We think. You follow him into the scriptorium, a long, cold room filled with desks, quills, and scribbled over parchment. No one else is here. They're in the infirmary, he explains softly. Some won't be coming back. Turns out this particular monastery became a place of desperate pilgrimage during the last outbreak. People came seeking help, sanctuary, or absolution. The monks did their best. They housed them, prayed for them, buried them. Then they themselves began to fall sick. Rats came next. Of course. Here's a curious detail. This monastery, unlike others, didn't attempt to purge the rats. They documented them. One monk, Brother Albinus, kept a ledger of sightings, droppings, and nesting patterns, meticulously. He even named the more persistent ones. Isidore, Brunhilde, Quiet Peter. He wrote, "Where Quiet Peter goes, so follows the fever. He is a whisper in the stone." Historians still argue whether Brother Albinus was a visionary or delirious, but his records became strangely predictive. 2 days before a group of pilgrims died, he noted rat tracks beneath their beds. A week before the abbot fell ill, Quiet Peter was seen near the chapel door. Coincidence? It's hard to say when the rats have better attendants than your scribes. The monk guiding you shows you the original ledger. The pages crackle softly. You run a finger along a sketch of a rat, simple but with oddly soulful eyes. Below it in Latin, amicus aut mortis, friend or death. It's not just drawings and notes, there are theories, wild ones. One page speculates that rats are drawn to souls unanchored, whatever that means. Another suggests that the plague moves faster in places with greater discord between man and earth. That might sound like nonsense, but the monk says it makes sense if you think about it metaphorically. "We were broken," he murmurs. "They came to clean up." You raise an eyebrow. "Scavengers," he clarifies, "but also shepherds in reverse." You ask if anyone here believes the rats carry souls like boats across a river. He shrugs. "We believe many things when death walks the halls." In the library, what remains of it, you find a collection of marginalia. Monks, it turns out, were not immune to doodling. Tiny rats appear in the corners of holy texts, chewing the pages or wearing tiny crowns. One wears a bishop's hat, another rides a pig. "That one's a joke about our last archdeacon," the monk grins. "He wasn't very popular, but it's not all humor." One chilling note scribbled in the gutter of a book of hours reads, "They listen through the walls. Do not whisper names at night." You stop reading after that. The monastery itself is quiet, save for the occasional cough behind stone doors. You pass through a cloister garden where the rats have made tiny trails in the soil. The monk gestures to a patch where they've chewed. The stems of every herb except sage. "They're picky," he says. Or wise, you think. He hands you a small parchment copy of Brother Albinus's map, a sort of plague rat forecast. You fold it into your sleeve, just in case. Before you leave, he takes you down a spiral staircase to what he calls the rat reliquary. The room below is dark, cool, and surprisingly ornate. Candles flicker beside jars and wooden boxes. Inside, the boxes? Rat bones, skull fragments, tiny claws mounted in silver. Memorial, he explains. Or maybe warning. This practice isn't unique. During the late plague years, many holy orders began preserving rat remains. Some believed the rats were tools of divine punishment. Others thought they were scapegoats for something darker, an invisible wrath no one could name. Either way, the bones became relics. People touched them for protection. Some wore rat bone rosaries. Fringe? Absolutely. But when faced with years of death, even the absurd starts to look like strategy. The monk lights a final candle and tells you that during the worst year, the rats stopped running. They just sat still, silent, watching the sick. It was almost reverent, he says, like they knew the end had come. You thank him and step back into the light, blinking. The air feels heavier now, not with doom, but with something more. Aware. You look at the stone walls of the monastery, the rat carvings peeking from cracks, the silence that hums like a distant drumbeat. You wonder who's really been watching whom. As you walk away, a rat darts across your path. It stops, meets your gaze, and for a moment, you both pause. Then it's gone. You leave the monastery behind, but it lingers, like the scent of incense on old robes or a half-remembered dream. The path bends through a small grove, where the air grows cooler, shadowed. Twigs snap under your boots. Above you, crows mutter, and the trees, those perpetual witnesses to whatever the Middle Ages threw into the dirt. Your journey brings you into the orbit of a rural healer, a woman known only as Sister Ulma, though no church would claim her. She lives in a weather-battered cottage strung with herbs and tiny bells. You'd mistake it for a wizard's hut, or maybe a giant bird's very organized nest. She invites you in before you even knock. Another one of those unsettling intuitions that are either magic or just very good hearing. Inside it smells like smoke, lavender, and boiled onion. Her walls are crowded with bundles of dried plants, curious stones, and rat skulls painted with red symbols. You don't ask what the symbols mean. You just try not to touch anything. Ulma has stories. Of course she does. She pours you something warm that tastes like moss and regret, then begins to speak. Her voice is slow, cracked like a frost-thinned window. The rats talk, she says plainly. You do your best not to blink too obviously. Not like you and me. Not with words, but with signs. Movements. Where they run. When they freeze. How they sit with their backs to the wind. That tells you when fever's coming. If they die outside, their nests, you bury the children. You take a careful sip. Definitely moss. Sister Ulma claims to have learned from rats, not just about disease, but about fate. She speaks of a peculiar year when the rats brought no plague, but instead wandered into homes encircled cradles. Some thought it a blessing, others a curse. Babies born that year were said to have strange luck, an abundance of fortune or terrible tragedy. No in-between. Historians still argue whether these tales were a form of folk warning, post hoc prophecy, or just very desperate attempts to make meaning out of chaos. But in Ulma's world, every tail twitch and paw print mattered. She even had a chart, hand-drawn, brittle, where she matched rat behavior with moon cycles and human births. Somewhere between astrology and pest control, it actually looked compelling. Or maybe the moss drink was kicking in. She shows you a jar filled with what she calls rat stones, small pebbles allegedly left in places of death, neatly arranged, in circles or lines. She claims the rats brought them there, always near the feet of the deceased. When she tested the theory, marking where each body lay, she began to notice the stones too, smooth, water-worn, unlikely to come from the nearby soil. Rats as messengers, rats as mourners, rats as funeral directors. You ask if she ever feared them. She smiles with far too many teeth for that to feel comforting. Fear is for when you have options. I had none. I listened, or I died. According to Ulma, the plague taught people to see rats not just as pests, but as omens, dark mirrors of human frailty. Their presence became a language, their absence, a silence to be feared. And for some, like Ulma, they were part of a ritual, understanding of life and death. She didn't just survive the plague years, she thrived, treating the sick with poultices and charm stones, sometimes with pure luck. And always with the rats nearby. She tells you one more story before you leave. There was a boy, she begins, brought to me with fever. His mother had already carved his burial charm, but a rat climbed onto his bed and lay across his chest, not biting, not moving, just breathing with him. For 2 nights, then it left, and the boy woke up. You ask what she thinks happened. She shrugs. Maybe it took the fever, or maybe it gave him something worse. You politely thank her and back out of the cottage, trying not to brush against the string of dried rat tails hanging from the lintel. Outside, you take a long breath, free of moss-scented prophecy. Down the path, a small stone marker catches your eye. On it, carved faintly, is the shape of a rat. No text, just the symbol. You run your finger along it and feel how smooth it's been worn, touched often. Revered? Feared? You don't know. You don't want to. From that spot you can see a field. That's gone fallow. The soil has turned dark with disuse, and here and there burrow holes break the surface. Once you might have thought rabbits. Now, you aren't so sure. People in the surrounding village speak of rat paths, routes the rodents take that seem to avoid certain homes and pass through others. Some villagers have taken to mimicking the rats, building small holes in their walls, leaving offerings of grain or fat, as if trying to appease something older than sickness, as if the plague itself were a spirit, and the rats its priests. A fringe practice, yes, but one quietly spreading by the early 15th century, especially in places repeatedly struck by outbreaks. You find traces of it in parish notes, tax records, even local sermons where the preacher half-jokingly says, "Blessed are those who host the Grey Pilgrim, for he passes the fire." Scholars still debate whether this reflects an organized folk cult or merely fragmented, desperate superstition. Either way, it shows how deeply rats burrowed not only into homes, but into minds. They weren't just agents of disease. They became symbolic actors in a cosmic drama, heralds of ruin, bearers of fate, even protectors if treated with enough reverence. You spot one now, sitting near a stump, nibbling on something invisible. It looks up, doesn't run. You half expect it to speak. It doesn't, but it doesn't need to. You walk away from Sister Ulma's territory with a lingering chill, like the whisper of fur against your ankle in an empty room. The road leads into the low hills again, and before long you're standing beneath a crumbling city wall. It's stones, patched and repatched with mismatched blocks. Beyond it lies a town that time never meant to remember. Half market, half memory. The rat has already arrived. You know because it's everywhere. In the corners of your vision, in the shifting whispers of the people who pass by with hurried steps, in the absence of dogs and cats who, in some places, simply stopped barking and never came back. There's an unease here that no sermon can smother. This is a town that doesn't want to admit what it's been through. You hear it first in the tap of hooves, small, tired. A tanner's cart rolls past, bearing stacks of worn leather, and a red-eyed boy who clutches a wooden carving shaped like, you guessed it, a rat. It's oddly well made, not grotesque. In fact, it's got a bit of a noble pose, upright, proud. You wonder if it was meant as protection or tribute. Rats weren't always painted with fear. In strange little corners of medieval belief, they even earned admiration. Survivors noticed how rats withstood the worst. While people died in rows, the rat carried on, resilient, evasive, defiant, and in some warped twist of logic, that resilience became something to admire. In this town you find stories of a rat saint, not officially canonized, of course. The church would have had a theological aneurysm. But in the back room of a cobbler's shop, tucked behind a leather apron and a stack of threadbare boots, there's a small shrine, a painted rat carved into the wood, its tail curled like a halo. Locals leave offerings, breadcrumbs, shiny buttons, even locks of hair. It's believed that if the rat saint watches your home, you'll never die alone. Kind of sweet, in a slightly terrifying way. Historians still argue whether this was satire, heresy, or sincere desperation. You overhear a gaunt bookseller mutter to himself as he rearranges volumes that haven't been touched in decades. One spine reads Vita Ratus, an anonymous manuscript full of short poetic tales about plague years seen through a rat's eyes. The rat becomes a kind of Christ figure, sacrificed in a burning barrel to save a village, then reborn with silver, fur, and glowing teeth. Definitely fringe theology. Surprisingly readable, even more intriguing. A handful of churches in this region have small corner frescoes, painted not by official commission but probably by local artists working in off hours. that feature a rat in the margins, not chewing on grain or crawling through rot, just present, watching, almost like a mascot for survivors, a nod to what lived through what humans could not. You pause at the town square where a stone well dominates the center. People still draw water from it, but the superstitions hang thick. A circle of symbols is etched into the base, stars, spirals, and what might be stylized rats' tails. No one admits to carving them. No one wants to remove them either. A butcher tells you quietly, it's for luck. You bless the well, they bless your house. He doesn't specify who they are, and you don't press. A curious thing has started happening in this place. Children play rat-themed games. Not like Ring Around the Rosie, though that's here too, thank you again, Plague, but new ones. They mimic the rat, skittering, hiding, crawling through tunnels of blankets. In one game called Pied's Echo, a chosen child leads others in a dance, pretending to be a Pied Piper. Except they don't walk to music, they walk to silence. Only those who can hear the silent song are allowed to follow. You find this mildly terrifying, also clever, also possibly a coping mechanism passed down for generations. In the cloth dyers district, you're shown another strange tradition. During the summer months, when pestilence tended to reappear with the heat, women would weave tiny gray rats into the border of shawls and cloaks. Not real ones, thankfully, but embroidered shapes. They called it rattling, believed to offer stealth against death. Hide in plain sight. The motto goes, if death seeks a rat, let it find one. There's something poetic in that. Grim acceptance blended with playful defiance. After all, rats were the original shadow dwellers, the survivors of sieges, the skulkers beneath the boots of armies and plague carts. And speaking of plague carts, you hear a cart approaching now. Not the tanner's, but one pulled by two exhausted mules, its wheels squealing like they're haunted. A man in layered rags drives it, and behind him sits an odd passenger, a puppet shaped like a rat dressed in priest's robes mounted on a pole. The driver chants softly. No one makes eye contact. This, it turns out, is a ritual called Processio Muris, the rat parade, held only when the town suffers multiple unexplained deaths, a symbolic warning, a public exorcism, or a really weird street performance. Historians still argue whether it originated from genuine folk panic or theatrical protest. The puppet is named Brother Nibbler. You follow at a respectful distance, listening to the driver's song, half nursery rhyme, half lament, lines about teeth that gnaw through lies, eyes that see sin in darkness, paws that guide the pure. You're not sure whether to be moved or mildly concerned. Later, in a dim tavern where the candles flicker suspiciously, even when the doors are shut, you learn that Brother Nibbler is considered a prophet, or a scapegoat, or both. Children ask him for dreams. Adults blame him when food spoils or fevers rise, but no one ever mocks him. One local tells you, you don't laugh at rats. They're listening. You believe him. By now, you realize something essential. This isn't just about survival. It's about inheritance. Rats became more than a symbol. They became ritualized into daily life, part of a quiet liturgy of fear and fascination. They skittered through the cracks in Christian doctrine, into the space where saints and sinners blurred, where folklore outlasted theology. You sip your weak ale and watch one scurry across the rafters. It doesn't run. It nods. Maybe. The road turns muddy after that last town, and so do your thoughts. You walk slower now, not because you're tired, though you are, but because the stories are starting to weigh on you. All this reverence for rats, this uneasy blend of terror and tenderness starts to feel like a dream you half remember, one where the nightmare keeps smiling at you. Still, you press on. There's one more stop the locals whispered about. A forest. Nothing unusual about that on the surface. Medieval. Europe was mostly trees and fields. But this one is different. No town marks its edge. No signs point to it. You know you're close when birds stop chirping and even the flies buzz a little softer. The forest has no name, or rather, too many names. The black green, the gutterwood, the hollow thicket, and, most ominously, the Rat King's cloak. If your skin doesn't crawl hearing that, you might want to double-check you're not already a ghost. A traveler from the last village gave you a warning. Don't walk in angry, don't walk in loud, and, for heaven's sake, don't mock what you see. Then he handed you a sprig of dried thyme tied with a red thread and refused to explain further. Into the woods you go. It smells damp and cold even in late spring. The trees press in tightly, as if they're trying to listen. You step over twisted, roots and past stone markers etched with simple spirals. No words. The deeper you go, the more the air changes. Cooler, still, like a cathedral that lost its priest. About half an hour in, you spot it. A clearing ringed with mushrooms, flat stones, and something that makes your heart stumble. Tiny totems. Dozens of them. Each is roughly rat-shaped, carved from bone, wood, or soft stone. Some are perched on twigs like thrones. Others lie curled in tiny nests. One has a crown made of thorns. Another has wings made of birch bark. And one particularly unsettling. Figure has 5 tails twisted like a braid. It's hard to say whether it's cute or cursed. But the eeriest thing? They're positioned like worshippers, facing inward, toward a circle of scorched earth at the center. The Rat King's altar. You've probably heard of the Rat King in passing, a clump of rats, tails tangled, supposedly fused together by filth, myth, and some divine joke. But here, it's something more. It's a presence, not a deity exactly, but a force, a warning. An echo of medieval horror stories whispered under straw roofs. In 15th century Saxony, there's a record of such a king preserved in a jar, its mummified tails tied in a grisly knot. Historians still argue whether it was real, faked, or simply misunderstood. One theory says the kings weren't literal at all, but symbolic, a metaphor for unbreakable contagion, society stuck in its own mess. This forest believes otherwise. Feel it watching, not from above or around, but below. The soil seems to hum. You shift your weight and feel the ground subtly give, like something is tunneling beneath it. Rationally, you tell yourself it's moles, or wind, or you've inhaled too much mold. Emotionally, you know the Rat King lives here. One of the more fringe medieval accounts speaks of the Rat King as an oracle. People would leave questions at certain hidden shrines and return a week later to read the answer in the arrangement of droppings, feathers, or bones. Sounds ridiculous. But you do find a small parchment tucked into the hollow of an old stump. It reads, "Will it return? No. Signature. No answer. You crouch at the edge of the scorched circle. It smells faintly of burnt cloves and something meatier. A copper tang clings to the air. You wonder what might happen if you stepped inside the circle. You also know better than to try. Instead, you sit, quiet, breathing in the moss and the myth, Squirrel watches you from a branch, twitching nervously. Then you hear a rustle, not large, not threatening, but purposeful. Something shifts a leaf pile a few feet away and vanishes. You decide it's time to go. As you leave the forest, you can't help but notice the strange peace you feel. Not comfort, exactly, but closure. Like walking away from a grave that was long, overdue for flowers. The Rat King, whatever it may be, doesn't follow. But its lesson does. The line between reverence and revulsion is thinner than whiskers. Back on the road, you pass a weathered milestone. It's carved with the word return in Latin. Just that, as if you ever could. You reach a small roadside chapel by dusk. It's abandoned now, reclaimed by ivy and bees. But inside, you spot one last surprise. A carved wooden panel showing saints battling demons, fairly standard medieval fare. Except one saint rides a chariot pulled by oversized rats. He's holding a book labeled Lux in Tenebris, Light in Darkness. You wonder what sermon was preached here. Whether anyone ever believed, idio, or if it was just another moment of madness dressed as faith. Faith, after all, needed shape. And sometimes that shape had fur and teeth and came out only when the candles dimmed. As you drift away from the chapel, the first stars begin to appear. You realize that, for all the horror rats brought, they were never just symbols of death. They were reminders of how thin life stretched, how close to collapse it always ran, and how people, desperate for meaning, sometimes turned even their tormentors into gods, or at least into something worth remembering. You walk now through quieter places, pastures, sleepy hamlets, mossy ruins no one bothers to name. The big stories have been told, but the little ones, the whispers hiding in low stone walls and crooked chimneys, are just as alive. And rats? Oh, they're still there too, watching, waiting, living in every nook where memory curls up and pretends to forget. You pass a mill, long abandoned with its wheel cracked and dry. The door hangs crooked. Just inside, behind a fallen sack of grain, you spot an old iron trap still set, dusty, rusted but deadly all the same. A relic of the countless small wars between man and mouse, fought not in cities or cathedrals, but in pantries. Medieval records show that millers, particularly superstitious bunch and rightly so, often blamed poor harvests or spoiled grain on rats sent by witches. That's right. Not ordinary vermin, but cursed emissaries. There's even mention in a 1382 court roll of a woman accused of conjuring rats with a whistle. She was sentenced to cease whistling, which, in a way, might be the gentlest witch trial verdict in European history. You smile at that thought. And then you wonder what happened to the rats when she stopped. Further on, you find a village that seems preserved, not lived in, not ruined, just paused. A few crows peck at a roof beam. A laundry line still flutters, though no one hangs clothes. And on one door, scrawled in faded charcoal, the dreaded symbol, Pax plus 1349, peace, and the year of the Black Death's wrath. Historians still argue whether these plague marks were prayers or warnings. Some say they were meant to keep spirits out, others claim they were tombstones for homes. Either way, the rats never read them. In one cottage, the hearth still holds brittle kindling. On the mantel, a child's wooden toy shaped like a fat, smiling rat. Its tail is missing, its ears rubbed smooth. Not a symbol of fear. A pet, maybe. A friend. You pause longer than expected. It feels like someone should still be here. As if the family just stepped out, but the dust says otherwise. You sit on the stoop for a moment. Listen to the silence. Then you hear the faintest squeak. Not mechanical, not imagined. You look down, a real rat. It's small, young, whiskers twitching. It stares at you for a moment with eyes too dark to hold reflection. Then, without hurry, it turns and disappears into a crack beneath the floorboards. You don't follow, you just nod, as if to say, "Yeah, I see you. Not far now." You reach the hilltop that was once a watchpost. All that remains is a chunk of wall and a rusted bell. The sun starts to dip, painting the fields gold. From up here you see the world laid out like a medieval map. Forests, rivers, towers, farms, and shadows. So many shadows, the kind that stretch longer than they should. And in the center of it all, rats. Still. Always. They scurry in the alleyways of memory. They nest in the soft corners of legend. They're not heroes or villains, they're constants. They carried plague, yes, but also food. They were feared, but also studied. Even loved. In 14th century Venice, there was a curious trend. Some nobles kept domesticated rats as pets, bred for their intelligence and soft fur. A fringe tidbit, yes, but it happened. For every person who cursed the creatures, another may have whispered to one as a confidant in the dark. Loneliness makes strange companions. You rise and begin descending the hill. The road leads toward a monastery ruin, one of those places lost to time, with only half a bell tower and a few cloisters left. The place hums with stillness. You walk. The stone path where monks once prayed. Birds flutter through the arches, and then you notice the carvings, not saints, not angels, rats tucked in corners, nibbling at vines. One perched on a chalice, another curled beneath a sandal. It's not mocking or fearful, it's reverent, integrated, like the artist saw them not as threats but as reminders of humility, of frailty. In a weathered book discovered here, once protected by the Abbey of St. Nestor, there's a marginal note. God made even the low things to remind us we are not high. Could be a monk's reflection. Could be a rat's revenge. 1. Final chamber remains. The library vault mostly collapsed. Yet on the far wall, half hidden by ivy and years of rain, you see it. A mural, faint but intact. It shows a robed figure, possibly a monk, possibly death itself, kneeling before a massive rat. The rat sits on a stone pedestal, tail curled like a question mark. Its eyes are not menacing, they're gentle, almost kind. Below, one phrase in Latin, omnis creatura docet. Every creature teaches. The wind picks up slightly. You wrap your cloak tighter. The day is ending. But your journey, this strange, shuffling pilgrimage through plague, myth, and fur, is not a circle. It's a spiral, each twist deeper, each step softer. You begin the walk back toward the world of the living. And as you do, the rats fade from sight, but not from thought. They've become part of you now, not as monsters, not even as metaphors, but as messy, resilient, hungry little truths skittering through the corners of history, reminding you of just how small, how strange, and how oddly beautiful survival can be. Night has fallen now, though it feels like it's always been dark in this part of the world you've wandered into. The stars overhead look ancient, pinpricks in the sky like holes poked through parchment by a curious monk who really should have been copying psalms. You hear your own footsteps crunch softly on the gravel path, though it almost sounds like something else is walking in time with you. But when you stop, nothing echoes. Of course, you've reached the final leg of this strange and winding journey, and with it comes one last image, a courtroom, but not the kind with powdered wigs or gavel-slamming judges. No, this one's stranger. In 15th century France, rats were quite literally put on trial. Yes, seriously. There's a record from 1508 in autumn where an entire infestation of rats was accused of destroying the barley harvest. A lawyer, Bartholomew Chassenet, one of the most respected legal minds of his time, was assigned to defend them. And he did, with passion, with actual legal reasoning. He argued that the rats, being spread out across a large area, hadn't all received adequate notice of their summons, and therefore they couldn't reasonably be expected to appear in court. Let's pause for a second. You imagine being a rat, receiving a subpoena, maybe delivered by a tired owl in a little waistcoat, and then you, a modest field rat with a family to feed, are suddenly entangled in bureaucratic absurdity. Chassenet won. Well, sort of. The case was ultimately dismissed, not because rats were declared innocent, but because the court couldn't figure out how to proceed. You can't exactly arrest 1,000 furry defendants who are actively ignoring your letters. Historians still argue whether this trial was entirely sincere, a weird local ritual, or just medieval satire played straight. But the record exists, and that's what matters. These trials weren't unique either. Similar proceedings happened in parts of Switzerland and Italy. Pigs were put on trial for murder, locusts for property damage, eels for, well, eel-related misdeeds. But rats got the best lawyers, and it wasn't just the courts that tried to keep rodents in line. There were rat catchers too, those wandering figures with sacks, poisons, and little carved charms meant to coax rats into leaving a town. Think of them as part exterminator, part bard, part magician. The most famous, of course, is the Pied Piper of Hamelin. You've heard the story. He plays his flute, lures the rats away, and when unpaid, he returns to steal the children. But there's something you might not know. The earliest versions of the tale don't even mention rats. The oldest written account, from around 1300, talks only about missing children, 130 of them, vanishing from Hamelin without explanation. The rats were added later, perhaps to make the tale more logical, or more disturbingly, more palatable. It's easier to imagine a town being punished for stinginess than to accept that children just disappeared. So maybe the rats were a narrative scapegoat, or maybe they were real. Historians still argue whether the event was plague-related, migration, or some darker incident buried in silence. The point is, rats became symbolic, not just as disease bringers, but as catalysts. Whenever something terrible happened that people couldn't explain or didn't want to face, the rat became the mask you slap on the nightmare. Even today, they linger in our language. A rat betrays. Rat race equals empty struggle. Smell a rat? Suspicion. And yet, if you've ever had a pet rat, you know they're clever, affectionate, even funny. Which makes all the projection that much more ironic. Back in the day, some thinkers knew this too. A lesser-known friar named Gervase of Tilbury once wrote that rats were the shadow of our hungers. He believed that wherever people stored food, wealth, or secrets, rats would follow, not to ruin but to reflect. A kind of rodent mirror, frightening not for what they are but what they show, and maybe that's what they've always been. From the Black Death to bedtime tales, rats force us to look at what we hide. Our decay, our greed, our fear of being overrun. They are uninvited guests in the house of our conscience. You leave the courtroom, or maybe it leaves you. You're not quite sure anymore. These places are starting to blur. But one thing is certain. You're done running from rats. Now you acknowledge them. Nod at them when they appear. Maybe even thank them. Because here's the strange twist. Without rats, much of what we know about medieval life, the real gritty, stinky, terrified human side of it, would be harder to trace. They were witnesses to everything. And sometimes they were the messengers. Remember that mural in the monastery? The rat on the pedestal? Every creature teaches. That includes the ones we're taught to hate. And just like that, your feet begin to slow. The wind softens. The earth is quieter now. You've come full circle, not to a solution or a clean moral, but to a sense of odd companionship. The rats are still with you. And strangely, you're okay with that. Maybe it's not about exorcising the terrors of the past. Maybe it's about understanding that they're part of the architecture. In every grand hall, there's a scurry in the shadows. In every legend, a tail flicks just out of frame. And so, we arrive softly now. At the end, word count, 1 through 90. Wind down, 300 words. You've walked a long way tonight, through narrow alleys and echoing halls, across bridges of bone and time. You followed the rats, not out of fear but curiosity, and they, in turn, led you deeper into a world few bother to remember in such detail. A world of whispers, of shadows that twitch, of truths hidden in fur and claw. But now it's time to let it all go. Gently, let the medieval cities fade back into mist. Let the courtrooms, the bells, the scribbled prayers in forgotten languages all dissolve into quiet. The rats, too, they've, scurried back into the walls of memory where they belong. Not to bother you, but to keep watch. Feel your breath slow, your thoughts stretch out, lazy and long. Picture candlelight flickering on old stone. Hear distant footsteps fading. You are safe now, wrapped in the hush of history's embrace. No more plague, no more fear, just stories, and maybe a tiny tale disappearing around the corner, reminding you that even the smallest things can leave the deepest prints on time. So rest now, you've earned it. The rats will keep your secrets, and in the silence between dreams, they may even tell you a few of their own.